How's it going, guys? Happy holidays, and thanks for tuning into this episode of the Phil Talk Sports Podcast. Myself, Nick Rice, joining you as Christmas approaches. That means only one thing also, that it's bowl season, and we are smack dab in the middle of it. Playoffs start this weekend. Whole lot more going on, coaching moves, and things of that nature. We're going to talk about it all today. Nick, happy holidays, man. Good to see you.
Good to see you. It means bowl season. It means NFL playoffs is around the corner. And it means random podcasts have random campfires in their background. So I think we're complete right about now.
Yeah, just be careful. If that fire gets any bigger, we're going to have to call the marshal because, safety and all that.
That's
But
right.
I'll keep an eye on it since it's behind you. But very fancy, very nice for sure.
I appreciate it.
So while my school nor your school made a bowl this year, that will not stop us from talking about them at length. So before we get into bowl season, as they've kicked off a bit, the big ones really start in about 24 hours after we record this. But my last episode was just a ongoing monologue of just myself with the news that Scott Frost returned to UCF. And I would not want to deny Nick the ability to give his thoughts on that from a more unbiased perspective than I tried to give, because I'll say this now that it's marinated for about 2 weeks, it is the reception from the fans way more positive than I expected. I thought it was going to be way closer to 50-50. I might be one of the more negative ones, and I'm more of a wait and see guy at this point. Like, that's one of the more negative opinions I've heard is my own. So I'm just going to say that I'm shocked that it's, I would say 90-10 as far as positivity for Frost. And I get the emotions that come with him returning and all that. But, you had to listen to me get all the details. I thought I nailed it with G.J. Kinney. It looked like he was going to be the coach. Then it looked like Liberty's coach, Tulane's coach, Partridge in a Pear Tree, and we end up with Scott Frost returning. So what was your thoughts when this even became an inkling that it could happen, and then when it did happen?
Well, actually, real quick, I'm curious what your opinion, if you have one, about why it's so positive about Scott Frost returning.
It's got to be the emotion. It's got to be just he gets what it takes to succeed here. He did it once. Now we have a bigger budget. I see the positives, and I think people are choosing to ignore that he's had one winning season as a head coach. I think a lot of people are dismissing the Nebraska failure, which is what it was, due to the fact that they have an former NFL coach there now that's still not succeeding. He finally made a bowl game, their first one in 7 years or whatever it is. We'll see how that pans out when they play Boston College in Fenway. And he basically admitted in the press conference, which I'm not a press conference guy. I don't watch that stuff when guys get hired, guys get fired. But this one intrigued me, right? I had to watch it. And he basically said without saying, I went because I had to go and my heart wasn't in it. And it's very hard to do a good job at anything if your heart's not truly in it, especially, resurrect a all but dead, program as far as their top tier days as Nebraska would be.
Yeah, so obviously, if folks want to watch the full rant, they
Yeah,
could go to your previous video, as I did, and thoroughly enjoyed it. In fact, was a little shocked at, I would never accuse you as being too biased about anything except for probably UCF, and the measured response and the details I didn't even know about was really intriguing. So check that out. I actually, what's funny, thought about in the moment when you were going through that initially about Jim Harbaugh, who's kind of polarizing. In the same way that you were probably more negative than most about Scott Frost getting hired, that was me last year with Jim Harbaugh. I went on here and talked about how he divides the locker room. He's really fun for a while, but then he gets wears on the locker room and gets, like San Francisco, gets to become a little bit of a nuisance. And with some other programs, and then you had the cheating thing. With Scott Frost, what's ironic is I think in the end he might end up having a similar impact at UCF, considering the fact that he may be a little more polarizing and doesn't necessarily, while he does have a resume of winning, isn't exactly regarded as one of the top elite head coaches, and as you thought of other coaches there, but he knows how to win there, just like how Jim Harbaugh, like a glove, fits right back into the NFL, knows how to win. And yeah, there is something about how when you return to your same roots and when you know the same area in terms of how to recruit, I think that plays an impact too. So I think the fans are right to be positive, but the funny thing about these coaching things, and while I think it may end up working out for UCF, it is a little bit of a crapshoot. Like, it's amazing how many times I think a guy is going to be good or a guy was good, and then in a new situation, he's not. So, it should work out, but I guess we'll wait and see.
My other big thing is like, how often does this happen that a guy that has success left in such a way is able to return to a school? And it's funny that in the same coaching cycle, Rich Rodriguez is returning to West Virginia, and he was the coach when
That
like
is
Pat
interesting.
White, Pat McAfee, Steve Slayton, Tavon Austin, all those guys were there. So for him to
Mhm.
return, I assume it's a similar thing in Morgantown. Mac Brown at UNC prior to the new hire that we'll talk about later, like that was a homecoming of sorts for him after leaving for Texas. So when you zoom out, it happens more often than I originally thought. So that calmed me down a little bit too. And one thing that blew my mind, because yeah, he's been gone for 8 years, but it feels like 3 weeks maybe. Because like Scott Frost is 50 years old now, or will be when the season starts. And even mentioned in the press conference, like I'm the same guy. I'm a little bit wiser. I'm more reserved now. Prior to this, you mentioned a coach at the other LA team, but prior to this, he was working with Sean McVay with the Rams. And I find it hard to believe that a coach with any sort of talent doesn't benefit from spending time with Sean
Oh,
McVay.
yeah.
He was an offensive analyst. I think prior to this coming up, Scott was not going to get another head coaching job. He probably wasn't even offered many other coordinating positions. I felt like his new goal in life was like, I'll work my way up the NFL ladder, maybe become an offensive coordinator in the NFL. I think if you asked him like 3 months ago what his professional plan was, that it was probably that. And we learned what was kind of a pretty well kept secret, that he interviewed for the offensive coordinator job twice for UCF in the Gus Malzahn era. And he pretty
That's
much said
interesting.
without saying, this Big 12 transition might be a tough one. I don't want to burn my second chance here being caught in fire for, a transition squad. So that was why he's like, thanks, but no thanks. It ended up working out this way. And I do think he was only here for 2 years. So even the first time there was not time for his message to be stale. But, other than that, he brought McKenzie Milton in as the quarterback coach. That alone is going to garner some good faith from people. And when you mention, like, I think he has a chance to have success, I think we need to have a conversation, not necessarily now, but in general, what success is going to be. Are we that team that has 8-5 seasons and maybe they have a 9-3 every 4 or 5 years, has a 10-win season, wins a conference every once in a while? To me, that's success. I think the ability to, like, we can't all be Ohio State that falls backwards into 11-1 seasons. Like, what I think of success is, that 8, 9, 10 win team wins bowl games, goes to bowl games. We had not missed a bowl game since 2011 until this year. So I'm sorry, 2015, of course, 0-12 season. But that, to me, that'll be success. That'll be making bowl games consistently, winning them, making the playoff when possible. But other people, and this might even happen, in your circles with like San Diego State, I'm sure you would appreciate that level of success with the Aztecs.
Mm-hmm.
But there's people that think, no, we got to move to the new Big 12 and we got to be winning that Big 12 and the Pac
Oh,
12,
the
make the
Pac-12, yeah.
playoffs. And people like yourself probably like, well, let's calm down. Let's look at this successfully. So the homecoming, this whole season's going to be. I do think it forces our fan base to have patience, which is something we haven't had in several years, because they know it's a full blown rebuild. It's not 0-12, but 4-8 ain't that much better when you look at the breakdown of how everything went. So it's a 5-year contract. The goal, I think, is by year 2 or 3 to be bowl eligible, maybe in the first year, hopefully. But it's a grind. It won't be a quick. The first thing he said at his press conference was, "I hope people don't think we're going undefeated next year." So he walked to the elephant in the room. And the only things that I would be negative about is you know me long enough. Like, I hold grudges. I don't let people that like I have a good memory, right? I tell elephants things they forgot, and
That's
is some of
funny.
that is some of that petty, yes, but like it did happen. So if everyone else is going to only talk about the good things, I feel like it was necessary to bring up the bad things. But I
Mm-hmm.
think a big key to this is athletic director Terry Mahadra. It was not the athletic director that was here at the time. Danny White went to Tennessee, and then he hired Josh Heupel to Tennessee. I don't think this has a chance of happening if Danny White's still here, because he would feel the way I feel. He seems like the kind of guy to hold a grudge. Terry Mohadra could at least go at it with an open mind. Like, I know what you've done here. Let me meet the guy. And now he apparently has now had a relationship with him for 3 years because he's interviewed him 2 other times. So it's all wait and see. I was just shocked at the 90-10 thing. I feel like I'm still one of the more negative opinions on it. And my opinion's not even that negative.
Yeah, no, for sure. But what the kids used to say, or I guess what the kids are now calling being a hater. Back in the day, it was just keeping it real, man.
Yeah,
Like
that was our saying for sure.
that's right. But to go back to your point earlier about how, it does seem like now we're seeing more coaches return to their alma mater, and guys that are rising up the ranks aren't necessarily like NFL coordinators and stuff. To me, that speaks to today's day and age, and where I think it'll balance out in a few years. But I do think that there's less coaching ability now than there was 5 years ago. I think the amount of good coaches out there is less. So maybe Scott Frost was in the top 3 of UCF's look and search, but he would have been top 5 years ago, considering a lot of coaches aren't interested in dealing with the transfer portal and NIL stuff. That is like a real thing where now that deters coaches. That deters guys saying, I'd rather go to the NFL or be a coordinator, stay in high school versus being a head coach in the college game. So I think that's part of it too. In the end, they probably would have hired Scott Frost either way, but I would have assumed that there would have been more demand for all these college programs 5 years ago versus this year.
I think it's a great point that there are, even if it's 20% of the pool have said, no, thanks, I'm good with the way college football is right now. And in 5 years, if college football gets its wits back about it, maybe half of that 20% dips their toe back in. But for now, it's thanks, no thanks. It's exactly why Nick Saban retired. He made no bones about the fact. Mac Brown, while he wanted to stay at UNC, that's why he has no intention. One, he's 72 years or 73 years old, but he's like, I have no intention of starting that grind again due to the way things are. I kept some friends that, because I'm pretty locked into this, some friends that also went to UCF that like they wanted to know what was up, but they weren't like actively looking for the information. My biggest opinion too was like, this might end up great. This might end up just okay, but you will not convince me that he was the number one choice. I think somebody said no at some point, maybe multiple somebodies. I think, Pat Summerall was courted from Tulane by at least 3 or 4 schools. I think we were one of them. I think he told all of them no, whether that's because they couldn't get the number right or they couldn't get the NIL number right. I think that's one that definitely did. So, but this happens all the time when you hire someone. You almost never get your number one guy, but once he's there, you got to act like he was your number one guy. So that's not, that's nothing new. So I don't think this was like the grand plan. And I throw it out there one more time, as bad of a failure as the Gus Malzahn era ended up being post his first year when we beat Florida. He really did do UCF a solid by leaving, stepping down, taking another job. Have to pay him no money. That's $12 million that he walked away from. Granted, he's doing fine where he's going and all that. As far as monetarily, I don't know how they'll do on the field, but so that was a great way to like, we're not shackled, because how many programs do you know are paying their past 2 fired coaches trying to get, you don't have to deal with any of that. And we're 1 year away from finally getting our full Big 12 paycheck. So financially things are looking up, and I say all that. I'm as quick to compliment as I am to criticize, and vice versa. He definitely did a solid. He admitted, I'm a big self-aware guy. His self-awareness said, I'm not the guy that's going to fix this program. So let me get out when I have a little bit of dignity. I still have a name value, and I can just go back to what I like doing, and that's running offense. I thought I was the guy that could handle it all. I'm the guy that can handle this very well. It's very much, I felt like Chip Kelly with the Eagles. I always equated him to a really good chef, but no matter how good of a chef you are, doesn't mean you can run an entire restaurant. I kind of equate some of these offensive minds to that. Sometimes it's the Sean McVay that, yeah, I'm a great chef and I can run the restaurant. There's plenty of guys like that, but there's plenty that aren't.
Yeah, what is curious, because I brought up coaching is like a crapshoot. If you were to 10 years ago look in a vacuum of Scott Frost and Gus Malzahn and say which one's going to perform better in their role, I think almost everyone would have said the former Auburn coach, the guy that's been, shining in the college ranks for a long time. But, sometimes it just comes down to, especially now with how competitive the transfer portal and recruiting is, it just comes down to maybe Malzahn wanted a handful of guys and just struck out on all of them, and maybe just didn't get a couple of good recruiting classes, and that's all it takes, especially as you're moving to the Big 12, between being, a bowl eligible team to where you guys were the last couple of years. So it could just be that. And I'm curious why, with Scott Frost tapering expectations, maybe he realizes this roster's not close right now, and he's going to need to, get some singles and doubles and recruiting the next couple of years to do good and move up the program.
Yeah, there was always this, like, he would recruit pretty well and just not play the guy. Like, it doesn't matter how good he is if he's not on the. Yeah, he had these weird, and then like his biggest swing and miss was KJ Jefferson, the quarterback, because clearly he likes a certain type of quarterback. He's been chasing Cam Newton since 2014, 2013, whatever. He's been looking for, and they don't make Cam Newtons anymore. They barely made the first one because he had to leave and go to junior college and come back, right? So, like, as talented and one of one as he is, even he almost didn't get his shot. So I think chasing the next Cam Newton came back to burn him eventually. That's a big thing. And we saw, if you spend a bunch of money on an NIL quarterback and it doesn't work out, that's a recipe for disaster. We saw it in Tallahassee. We saw it in Orlando. We saw it in a few other places this year. Ohio State, to their standards, I think their NIL guy isn't what he was cracked up to be, even though they're still in the playoff, the guy they got from Kansas State. So it really translates to figuring out what the landscape of college football is now. And you see it in these bowl games where the craziest story to me, I'm sure you're caught up on this or at least seen some of it, but like Marshall won their conference. They won the Sun Belt. They didn't rehire their coach. This guy goes to Southern Miss, who's like at the bottom of the conference he just won. 40 plus kids transfer, and Marshall doesn't even have enough kids to play in their bowl game. And this is a team that won a conference. So to me, that's because that was going to be one of the best non-playoff bowls out there. It was going to be Sun Belt champ Marshall versus American champ Army. That was going to be great. They got Louisiana Tech in there, a 5-7 team. I think just because they're local, because it was the Independence Bowl, which is in Louisiana. So that was one of the ones looking forward to. But where do you think, we're just going to talk about bowl games as a whole for a couple minutes. I might highlight a few here. But outside of the playoff, where do you think bowls are going to fit into the future if they do at all?
Yeah, well, I brought up on this show that what they need to do is kind of shorten the gap between conference championships and the bowl games and stuff like that. And I think what they wound up doing is just stretching out the back end. So now the playoff is going deep into January. Bowl games still start at the same time a couple of weeks later. But I mean, it's just an absolute clown show right now. To think that a school can't field a team, there has to be a change. I don't think anyone is arguing that the system we're at right now works. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, with bowl games, and the lack of attendance over the years, especially, with some of the ones in these kind of obscure places. I do like you said, that they're starting to go to baseball stadiums. It is kind of neat, and some other NFL stadiums for these bowl games. It does add a little spice, but yeah, there clearly needs to be a change. I'm curious what exactly you could do other than shorten that gap, especially teams that don't make the conference title but make a bowl game. You're looking at almost a month off, and I think that is just ripe for players saying, yeah, let me get a head start on next year. Forget about the bowl game and preparing for it, especially because one thing I watched just the other day, our California high school just had their state championship, and a lot of elite players in those state championship games play that game, and then they are on the practice field for their school. There's a offensive lineman for De La Salle, last name Johnson, I forget his first name, but he's projected to be a top 10 5-star recruit, and he signed with Oregon. So yeah, he's going to be, on the field and on the sideline for the Ducks next week. Or whenever they play. So the fact that guys can already see their replacement on the sideline, I think is more incentive for them to transfer to go to a place where they can play. So it's just a total mess right now, is what I'm trying to say.
I think you're onto something there for the teams that don't make conference championships. Like, that pool of teams are just sitting there. So let the bowl games that are going to pick from that pool anyway just start picking and scheduling. So that may be like that probably cuts a week off, maybe a week and a half off of that like low period that you're talking about. So I think you're onto something there for sure. And as the entertainment, like the football is never as bad as people claim it are with these. Like,
oh no,
the past two nights, like the LA Bowl was last night, UNLV and Cal, like that game ended 24-13. It was actually much closer than that up till the end. UNLV had a great year. Cal, decent year, first year in the ACC, which I'll never get used to that a California team is on the Atlantic Coast Conference. And then the Frisco Bowl the day before was a shootout, West Virginia and Memphis, 42-37. Those two in particular, I watched a good deal of those. I'm not going to claim that I watch every bowl, but those two in particular, I've watched over the past 2 nights. So you have to have a reason to watch, obviously. That's what it comes down to. Like, you may have checked out a UNLV or something. Maybe you caught some of their games this year. Like, you would want that reason to watch. But from the entertainment standpoint, some of these bowls are figuring it out. Like, as cheesy as it is, and pun intended, like the Cheez-It Bowl gets people talking. The Pop-Tarts Bowl get people talking. That Mayo Bowl where they dump mayo on the winning coach. I think they should dump it on the losing coach. That's just me personally.
Yeah.
But I don't know that you'd agree with that. You lose a game and you got to deal with that. At least if you're going to get mayonnaise all over you, it's because you won a football game. So I guess I see the difference. But those, are starting to – and then there's ones with like tomorrow at noon, Ohio versus Jacksonville State in the Cure Bowl. That one is a great cause. All the proceeds go to, cancer research and all that. That's played out here in Orlando. That is the only bowl game that has two conference champions playing each other. So some of these bowls have figured it out. Some of them haven't. So I think we need them all to have a purpose. They need it, whether their location is the draw, the gimmick is the draw, the sponsor is the draw. Because I feel like that's how it used to be. Like the Hawaii Bowl used to matter because kids got to go to Hawaii. And the Bahamas Bowl is the same way. So I think the location, every bowl needs to have a reason for being. They shouldn't just exist. I think that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, agreed on all that. One point I'd like to add, if the NBA players at All-Star Weekend tried half as hard as the college football players do in these bowl games, I think they wouldn't be changing their format. So it goes to show that, the college football game, the players want to play in the bowl game, except for, maybe a couple. That's another thing to talk about. Like, hey, you signed a contract, you should play in your bowl game, not rest for the NFL. But in general, the effort is there and the ideas are there, like you talk about. Just some of the other ulterior motives, some of the other things kind of they need to work on. But overall, still an entertaining time of the year.
Yeah, I mean, if you like football, it's hard to not. I'm not saying you're going to like every bowl, but some of these teams just deserve it. Like the one as we're recording that's on tonight, it's the New Orleans Bowl. Not a huge deal, but it is played in an NFL stadium, so they got that going for them. Georgia Southern, Sam Houston State. Anyone that knows Sam Houston State, their first year in FBS football, they went 9-3. They deserve to play in the postseason on some level, right? That's incredible. Their coach did leave to go to Temple, so that's part of it too. And I think a big thing, because we've mentioned the way the portal is now, which I think they're working on this. There's not going to be this early portal anymore. It's going to be after everything, only in the spring, because guys are opting out. Like you've heard the story of the backup quarterback for Penn State. Guys are opting out of playoff games, and that's just not what this should be about. As we jump to playoff talk, this is our first year with the 12 teams, and not that this should surprise anybody. People are arguing about the seeding, who got the buys, who got this, that, and the other. I do think it's flawed because, ironically, the number one seed got rewarded with like the toughest path in the playoff, in my opinion.
Right.
So, and when you look at it, to me, Penn State has the easiest route. Not that any of these teams are easy to beat, but to go from SMU and then Boise State, they can potentially kind of cruise right into the Final Four. So I think one of the issues with this is they need to reseed each round. I think that will eliminate that a little bit so that the number one seed always plays the worst team remaining seeding-wise. But overall, do you think this 12-seeded thing, this 12 team is where we're going to be? Do you think we're expanding? We're never going to go backwards. Part of me thinks we overexpanded. I would have been fine. I've said this for as long as I've had this show that if you do 6 or 8, but you have to win your conference title games are now playoff games. It's that simple. But where do you think we go from here? Are you happy with what this first year looks like? Everything's a work in progress, but what do you think?
For sure. Yeah, no, I was cool with 6 or 8 would have been fine. Nothing beyond that. So just like you, yeah, the 12 feels like a lot, but I really don't think we're going to expand. And that's not just wishful thinking, but I really think there will come a point when players start to complain about the sheer amount of games they're playing.
Right.
So I think there'll be enough chatter where going beyond that, adding a round would be a lot. So, but yeah, no, it's very exciting. And like you said, I think it's amazing to me. The NFL or the NBA does this too. Actually, the NFL, come to think of it, where it's not just top versus worst if certain teams win, because it's a bracket. It's not like a seeding thing. And I think that's, I don't know. I see the benefits of it. You know your path before you begin your path, but it does create, like you said, weird quandaries where Penn State doesn't really play a top seed for a couple rounds, while other teams play them since the get go. So it's got its flaws. I think that will probably stay because it's the same across the board. But I would go back to just reseeding every round, so if I'm a top team, I'm going to be playing the worst team every round, and vice versa.
Yeah, like in its current iteration, you want your team to be, I think it's like the 5 and the 6 seed. Like that's
Exactly.
that sweet spot that you're kind of getting at this point. And there's always going to be teams that people are mad that didn't make it. I mean, in a few months, we're going to have a basketball tournament that has 64 teams and then
Jeez.
68 with the play-in round, and there's still going to be that graphic of the first 4 teams out, and those fans and schools are going to be upset about it. So you're
Yeah.
never
Now
going
I
to
think that might get expanded. I got
yeah.
a gut feeling they're gonna figure out a way to add playing games on the playing games, but
Yeah.
just me.
But it's case in point that no matter how many you get, there's always going to be those people that just missed it. The
Mm-hmm.
70th team in college basketball gets to play victim, and we're that way right now with the 13th and the 15th, college football team. So it's
Right.
not going to
To
go
be
in.
fair, when it comes to the basketball thing, one, you see crazy upsets and,
Yeah.
non-top four seeds have won quite a bit. But also I think in basketball, the voting was kind of wonky. I think we all agree the playoff rankings were about where they needed to be. I'll have an opinion on some teams in a moment, but in general, like in basketball, there was a team that I think Ken Palm ranked like 25th, and they missed. I think it was Indiana, if I'm not mistaken. There was a team that was like clearly good enough, and they
No, it
missed
was
it.
Indiana State this past
Indiana
year.
State. It was
Yeah.
like 27th their
Mm,
ranking, and they missed it. So
yeah.
outside of that, I think there's enough teams, like you said.
So, given everything that we've just talked about, who do you feel the best about in this playoff this year? Oh, actually, I have one more thing before we give winners. The top 4 seeds don't play in the first round; they get the bye. That makes sense.
Yep.
But the first round games are played at home, so you are denying the number 1 seed a chance to play one of these games at home.
Yeah.
And here's the thing: you've added for the fan. I don't care how big of an Oregon Ducks fan or Penn State fan. You are not going to do that home playoff game, then fly to Arizona for the Fiesta Bowl, then fly to Miami for the Orange Bowl, then fly to wherever the national championship is 4
Yep.
weeks in a row. I love my team. I don't got nobody's got money like that. Like maybe 1,000 people have money like that. And
Mhm.
case in point, Penn State's home playoff game this year, they have 110,000 in that stadium. I say only 70,000 people are going to that game. That's for Penn State. That's an embarrassment. Like they can't sell the
That's
tickets
interesting.
because there's
Huh.
people that are going to go to this because it's local, which makes sense. But there's others that are like, I'm going to save my money, hope they win the first round so I can go to the
Mhm.
Fiesta Bowl or go to the Orange Bowl, wherever they get sent. So you're gonna wear out your fan base too. Like it's like, when the Lakers make the playoffs, do you go to a first round game or do you hold off to see if they go to the conference championship or the finals, right? As it for a team that
I
makes it
pick
all
a
the
round.
time.
I
Yeah,
pick a
yeah,
round. So it's
exactly.
like if
That
I'm
makes
going
sense.
to first, I'm not going the rest of the way.
Exactly. So
So
there's a little bit of that too. But yeah, so if you have favorites or anything, go for it.
all right, so I like 3 teams to win it all, especially Oregon. They've got their next Justin Herbert there and Dylan Gabriel, who seems to be playing even better now as the season goes on. But
I'd hope so. He's like
Ari-
28 now.
yeah, you would think.
Yeah.
Arizona State, they're very talented. I think they could go on a big run, and they've got the bye. And then Penn State, to your point, because of the way that the bracket worked out for them. And also, you probably know this, but their quarterback, Drew Aller, just announced he's going to return next year.
Yep.
And that, to me, bodes well this year, ironically, because it does feel like a handful of guys, when they announce they're going to the NFL, they're mentally no longer playing for the university they're suiting up for. So I think that bodes well for them this year. And then I got one team I really don't believe in, and that's Georgia, number 2 Georgia, because of their schedule, getting crushed by Ole Miss, losing to Alabama, didn't make the playoff, and then needing 8 overtimes to come back and beat Georgia Tech was another funky game that they won. So while they are the number 2 seed, and I guess winning the conference they won gives them that right to
Right.
have a bye, it does feel like they were a little overseeded. And I think we'll see that when they play the winner of Notre Dame and Indiana, where they're having a drag it out state title game there. So really like Oregon, and I'm pretty comfortable picking Arizona State and Penn State going on a big run.
It's funny with Oregon, everything's lined up for Oregon for the reasons you just mentioned, but they are the Penn State in modern time and Oregon of all time are like the Buffalo Bills of college football, right? They get close. They have a time where they're kings of their little quadrant, but can't quite pull it off. So it's like, if it don't happen now, when type thing for them. So I think they have a little bit of that, if not now, when situation going on. Looking more at the bracket, I agree. Georgia's probably overranked, right? But they're basically telling you, look, we left Bama out. We're not going to accurately rate 2 SEC teams. We got to overrate somebody. And yes, that Georgia Tech game was crazy, but how many times did they say it on TV? The rivalry week, sometimes you do have to throw the records out. And Georgia Tech had a sneaky good year anyway, baiting back into last year. So they're better than they were expected to be, and Georgia wasn't quite as good as they were expected to be. Here's another flaw in this current system when you talk about the biases of things. Notre Dame in this current format can never get a bye because it's the top 4 conference champions, and they're not in one. So that's one thing that people need to understand too.
Right, but on that point, the one benefit of this format that we were talking about is that they'll have their first ever home playoff game. So they've never had that before in their. Obviously, the playoff just started a couple years ago, but they first played in 1887. I looked this up earlier today. So 100-something years they get to host a playoff game. That's pretty cool.
Well, that's like during the COVID year when they were like a friends with benefits with the ACC, like they were a part of the ACC, and they've been playing for however many years you just said, and for the first time, so and so is a conference player of the week because for the first time they were playing in a conference.
That's right.
So it's funny how that works out. And funny enough, for that game, for them to be playing Indiana, that's like it's another in-state school, so that's pretty wild. That might be the atmosphere of the first round to me. That may be the coolest one to watch. Ohio State, Tennessee, Texas, Clemson. Those will be interesting. Texas is kind of in a like they weirdly like if there's a real script being written here, that QB gets hurt and Arch Manning takes them on a run. Like that's if they're writing scripts, that's how that's gonna go. But back to my original point, the Penn State and Oregon thing, like they're set up for success, but you need to see them get over that hump to actually believe that's going to happen. It's a very like Cleveland Cavalier type, like they actually finally did it, no matter how many times they were close to it. So those are definitely the interesting ones. I don't blame you for hyping up your Sun Devils because just because people didn't expect it doesn't mean it's not legitimate. Like they did everything they did, even though no one expected that to happen that way. So I was really happy that they snuck in that 4th spot. I thought they would easily give it to like the second. I'm surprised they let Texas slip down there. I'm very surprised about that. But that's, hey, if you're mad about it, get to their place and beat them. That's the way I look at that for sure.
I mean, realistically, I do think Texas shouldn't have been a top 4, so I think that was pretty accurately rated.
Right.
Penn State, if they are to win against SMU, would play Ashton Genty and Boise State. And to me, that's the game to watch. The next round, Penn State and Boise State. That would be an all-time great matchup. Ashton Genty could end up, if they count the playoff yardage, could be the leading yardage rusher in the history of college football. So that's going to be a really fun story there. But yeah, like you just look at some of these playoff matchups. We didn't even touch on Ohio State and Tennessee. Both of those teams are capable of going on a run too. So it is kind of interesting, the amount of teams that are in there where we could see some crazy college basketball type stuff this year where a lower seed goes on a run.
Yeah, I mean, someone can be the Baltimore Ravens of this whole thing and win it as like a 10-6 type team.
Yeah.
So that's very possible. You mentioned Genty there a few times. Do you think he should have been the Heisman?
Oh, for sure,
Yeah.
for sure.
I will say
It
this.
is really unfortunate
Mhm.
because it not only was him winning the Travis Hunter winning the Heisman, but him winning the Fred Biletnikoff Award, which was another thing. He didn't lead the nation in receptions, yards, or touchdowns, but he
Right.
won the whole thing. So that was pretty frustrating. Nothing personal with him, but yeah, Ashton Genty had a phenomenal year. Receiver from San Jose State, I think, was good enough to win that award, the Fred Biletnikoff. So, yeah, Ashton Genty was top 10 in the nation in rushing touchdowns. And if you compare him, I'm talking him as an individual would rank top 10 among all teams.
Yeah.
So you just look at stuff like that. It's really unfortunate, but not only that he won, that Travis Hunter won, but ironically, if I'm not mistaken, won the peer vote. You'd think it'd be backwards, where
Yeah. Yeah.
the media hyped him up so much, but I think people just saw Travis Hunter doing a "we've never seen this before" event. And I like LeBron too, but it's the same thing with LeBron, where it's like, oh my gosh, we've never seen this before. It's like, yeah, but Ashton Genty, while he didn't technically do, something we never saw before, he was the best player. I
Right.
mean, so all that in mind, I think he should have won. But, Travis Hunter also had an outstanding year. So let's not, act like he was just an average player.
Yeah, it wasn't that he shouldn't have been in New York or anything, but Ashton Genty led the nation in rushing. Number 2 in rushing was Ashton Genty after contact. So that, but as far as the Barry Sanders record, something that's really important to add context to, that number does not include his bowl game and conference championship performance. So that number is like 300 something yards more than the number that's being, because I think they picked in the mid 90s to start adding postseason games to your stat. I feel like you could easily separate them the way the NFL has your playoff records and your regular season records. This
Right.
brings up another question that sparked on Twitter for me. I still call it Twitter. Do you
Me too.
think the conference championship should be counted into the Heisman? Do you view the Heisman as a regular season award? Because I do, personally.
Yeah, same here, especially by this point. I think switching up the rules is kind of funky, and especially because not everybody plays this, conference championship. Just
Mm,
regular season stats, regular season being the award is just fine. I think this opens up the door to a playoff type award system where that
yeah.
would be fun to see the playoff, best player of the playoff or whatever. I mean, you see it in college basketball where you have the tournament MVP, all tournament team.
Mm.
So it absolutely can happen in the playoff too.
I mean, the NBA has this problem where like the regular season MVP award is given in like the second round of the playoffs, and then
Right.
like Jokic is clearly supposed to win it, but then he gets knocked out in the second round, and people are like, he didn't deserve it. He got knocked out in the second round. That wasn't about that. That should have been given to a month ago to him when
For
the
sure.
season ended. So it's similar to that in my regard. But I do think Gents probably should have won it. I get and I think it's more we haven't seen this. The last guy that did anything like this won the Heisman. I think that's what a lot of people, are looking back to it. But it'll be interesting to see how this play. I think there is more of a cluster than they want to admit for this. I'm happy they left Alabama out because you can't have all this convoluted stuff and that extra bias on top of it. We're always going to argue about the seeding unless you have a concrete way to seed everybody, and they really don't at the moment. But again, that's why 6 or 8 would have been better. Your conference championship are playoff games. Easy enough. That's all. I've been saying that. How long have we been doing the show? 2017? I've been saying that since 2017. So
Jeez, man.
before we
Yeah.
get out of here, we talk coaches in a little bit. And out of everything that, I don't know if this is, this is probably more surprising than the Scott Frost return.
Oh,
But
are you kidding me? This is like the shock of the year. Like,
I want to give you half a point of credit here because you said that Bill Belichick would not coach for a year and then take another head coaching job. You implied it'd be in the NFL.
no, I said he would retire. Actually, that was my.
All right,
So
well,
maybe I don't get that half a point. All
you
right.
get that point that they didn't do anything for the year, And then I don't see him. I think he's retired from the NFL at this point because by the time you finish
Yeah.
this,
All
there's
right.
no
Give
way.
him a half point. I'll take it.
Right. But how surprising is this to you? I have a lot of different ways I want to attack this. The one I want to get out there first is because I've listened to like the Boston people give their opinion. I've watched like the college people, the NFL people. There's a handful of the narrative that's like, well, Belichick was blackballed from the NFL and they didn't want him back, so he had no choice but to do this. And I'm like, is this the same guy that's had like multiple cheating scandals and spent the last 2 decades of his life coaching on the sideline with his middle fingers extended, the way he treated everybody that wasn't right under his nose and some people that were right under his nose? Like, this is
Right.
not a guy that gets to play victim about anything. Granted, I want to, he went to UNC because that's where his dad coached. At the press conference, he had like a sweater that his dad wore back in the 50s when he coached there. So this means something to him. He didn't just pick a random school. It's random if you don't know the details, but like this place means something to him. So I give him credit for that. But this thought process that like poor Bill didn't get another, like when you piss off everybody at a company, don't be surprised when you don't get offered a job at said company.
Right.
That's
Even
just,
if you're the best employee at that company, they
Right.
don't care. So I look at this first of all from like if you have a kid who grows up and is starting to get into the dating world, and this kid is like, I'm old enough now, I want to date, I'm looking for, a nice woman, college educated, who's got her life together. And then 6 months later, you see that kid is dating like a convict. Like, oh, she's in jail, but like, she'll figure it out soon enough. It's like, that to me is like the Bill Belichick thing, where it's like, what? Literally no detail about this job is makes sense considering the personality that you are and the age that you are, man. I mean, are you that much in denial? But this is just like out of a dystopian universe, man, and that's why I'm intrigued. And I don't exactly have all these predictions with him anymore because I don't understand it. So we're just gonna sit back, grab our popcorn, and watch what is a real weird year coming up in college football for North Carolina. The one prediction I will make, I don't know how good they were last year, but they should be pretty good on the field. So it's just, is he going to burn out after a year or two? Are they going to flame out at some point? Is he going to quit? I think those are all potential possibilities because this is just like the strangest news of the year by a mile.
You got to give credit to North Carolina, though. They went to Mac Brown and said, Mac, we love you. We like everything you've done for us, but we got to get younger at head coach. So they showed 73-year-old Mac Brown the door and hired 72-year-old Bill Belichick.
That's
so
right.
You got to give credit for sticking to your principle. That I'll give them. But, this story only gets weirder. There's the, like, if he quits after July 1st or June 1st of this coming year, his buyout's only $1 million. It goes from 10 million to 1 million. So he can quit before coaching a game. And, for anyone that would care to get Belichick, will have the $1 million to buy him out. And the part that doesn't get talked about enough with this, there is a clause in this contract that whenever he does hang it up, that his son, Steven Belichick, who's on his staff already, is the coach in waiting. So this seems flagrant to me that he's setting his son up for a head coaching job that he would not have been qualified for prior. I mean, after leaving the Patriot staff, he's been a defensive coach at the Washington Huskies. So maybe he's gotten decent, over the years, but like clearly not Power 5 head coach material. And I feel like that's not being brought up enough. Clearly, that's what this is all about. Similar to like, why is LeBron still playing? He made no bones about it, at least, of like, I want to play with my son. That only went so well. Although he did drop 30 in a G League game this year, so good stick that for that. But that needs to get talked about more. That's clearly what this is about. Now, does that mean he coaches 1 year, 2, coaches the whole 5, and they do the transition in the 5th year? But long term, and by long term I mean the 5-year plan, does this work? And what is this working to you? Similar to the Scott Frost question. What is this working? Do they win the ACC? Because you got to look at like Miami just mortgaged their entire future to get a Pop-Tarts Bowl bid this year. So we know what their ceiling now is. No matter how good they make that team, with as long as Mario Cristobal is there, like they're a 9, maybe 10 win team. Florida State, a lot of digging to do. Clemson's still there, but they're not what they were, but they're the top dog. And when that's the top dog, that's very obtainable. So is winning the ACC in football for the first time in probably 25, 30 years, is that the goal, right? Like, what is this working to you?
I think because the ACC might be weaker than it has been in years. Just think of Clemson and how they dominated for a while. It is to some degree up for grabs. I don't feel as confident about this as I did the prediction last year that he'd take a year off, or I guess in the case of Bill, wouldn't get the job he's looking for. I think they will within 3 years win the conference.
Okay.
I do. But I believe that with a total grain of salt. I don't have much confidence in that. Wouldn't put $10 of a bet on that. But I think if I had to choose, he will win the conference because he's so good. That's a name brand now. North Carolina football has always been solid. They haven't been like, Rutgers, I guess, is the team I can think of where it's like if they go 500, that's a success. Like North Carolina is a solid football program. I think Bill Belichick can lift that, and they can win a conference with him. But like you said, having the son in there, I think that's, hopefully the contract doesn't say you got to keep him for 5 years, pay him a bunch of money, or get crippled if you cut him.
It's probably something like that. It's probably at least
I hope
like 3
the
years.
security's not too good because, I think that's a potential disaster. But for the short term, for North Carolina, I think they're going to really turn things around.
And let's not pretend, too, that, like, he didn't pick, like, a Rutgers, like you said. Like, North Carolina, granted, they're always going to be a basketball school. This is still a school with Jordan money, right? It's even in the sense of football and college athletics, it's a top 20 recognizable brand. Mm-hmm. I think, like, if he did this at Duke, I think, like, Duke football was historically atrocious in the 90s. They went 9-90 in the 90s, right? That was after Steve Spurrier left. So I think out of the two, as a good example, like North Carolina football was always going to have a better chance than Duke football for whatever reason, because they have similar resources for the most part. Yeah. So this is not like if you're building a new dynasty on College Football 25, the best-selling sports game in American history, by the way, that was announced this week. So crazy. You finally build a game that people wanted for a decade and it sells. Crazy, right?
Yeah, and
if you were creating a dynasty mode, and you pick North Carolina, that's not a 1-star school. That's like a 3-star school. And in a good year, like a really good year, that they're like already a 4-star school. So he's not scrummaging at the bottom. Like people have said years before, like if he was going to take a coaching job, you think he'd pick like a service academy because that's like more his speed. Like if the Navy job came up this year, like would that have intrigued him? Potentially, right? So this is wait and see. Does this make you want to watch North Carolina at all this year? Will you turn
This does feel like you said, if he was the head coach of the Panthers, it's like, the Patriots have a level of discipline there. But from that aspect, I think it's also kind of weird. But to think from NFL terms, this does feel like he's signing up with the Patriots in the sense of before Belichick got there, the Patriots were about a 3.5-star NFL program. It's like, they made the Super Bowl. Sometimes they were fine, but he turned them into a juggernaut program. So like I said, I do think they're going to, really succeed, especially because people are saying, the recruiting pitch is not all that strong because he's so old. But to me, I go I think the pitch is actually better in college in a way because that demanding culture kind of fits more in college. NFL guys don't want to be told, that I could cut you and all that stuff. Right. So it's amazing how it worked there. And then second of all, Bill Belichick clearly has the coaching ability to send a guy who otherwise wouldn't be in the NFL to an NFL contract. So that is going to be very enticing to a lot of high school and junior college and transfer guys to say, hey, I can win right now.
In true Bill Belichick fashion, the first transfer that he locked up is a guy from Holy Cross. So he's still on, whatever tip. Because that's the big argument, right? Like his drafts have almost never been good. So how does that translate to recruiting? When you do have the lay of the whole land, you don't have to wait no one can pick your recruit before you if you were good enough to so that's the whole argument. We'll see how that all shakes out. But to me, it's very similar. The only NFL team that he was even linked to in his first year off was the Falcons, right? We know for the fact that he interviewed for the Falcons. All the guys that made that decision had to write down their top 3 candidates, and none of those people picked Belichick in their top 3. So, but had he picked the Falcons, it's pretty similar setup, like you're saying. Winnable division, not terrible, 3.5 stars. So he didn't pick the worst team, that's for sure.
Yeah, like I said, Bill Belichick, I think we quickly forget. He is in my top 5 all-time NFL coaches. I think we sleep too much on Vince Lombardi. People like to throw Andy Reid in there very quickly. Bill Walsh, I love him. Joe Gibbs, all-time phenomenal head coach. And Bill Belichick's right there, all-time great schematics guy. He's incredible. Do your job, not just tactician, but also just to get guys motivated to play after winning a Super Bowl, to come back the next year and play like they have for 20 years. It says something. He knows what he's doing. He's going to go to North Carolina, and he's going to be the greatest coach they ever had. Is he going to be the greatest college coach, of 2025? I don't know, because there are differences about how to coach college kids versus NFL kids, but he's going to go there and immediately be a huge boost in coaching. And I assume they're going to get guys from not Holy Cross, but other guys in transfer portals from bigger schools. No offense to his first recruit. And he's out there in the corner with his hands crossed, like, go and sign the dang paper now. So, but yeah, like, huge boost in coaching, even though the whole story is the weirdest thing of the year. And then you add in the girlfriend, it's like,
he connects to the younger generation better than we thought, apparently. So
that's right. Yeah, that's right. Is she going to get a scholarship there or something? So, yeah, just the whole thing's weird. But in the end, I think they will win a title in a couple of years in the ACC because he's that good. And then, I guess maybe his son's going to inherit a great program or a great team with a lot of talent.
Yeah.
That potentially could help him out for year one.
Any closing thoughts on anything else before we get out of here?
Chargers and Broncos at the time of our recording are playing tonight. Looking forward to the Chargers potentially locking up a playoff spot. Should be a lot of fun. And I'm sure we'll have an NFL thing around the corner. But like I said before, the Chiefs are 13-1, but I think they are very vulnerable. I'm not going to go as far as, I forget who said, I think it was Paul Pierce, which is funny. They're one and done. Like, I got my football fork in the ground. That, I know what I'm talking about, but I do think their chances of three-peating are very much in jeopardy. I don't think it'll happen.
I mean, I don't know about you, Nick, but when I need like really good NFL insight, the first account I'm pulling up is Paul Pierce. So, you were right to do that.
He's the truth. You know what I mean? He always speaks truth. So
that's true. That's going to do it for us, guys. Happy holidays. Enjoy the bowl game, and we'll see you in the new year. 2025. It's going to be good to all of us. So we'll see you then.